Okay, welcome. We're getting a few delegates signing up. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're okay. Just give everyone about 30 seconds to join us, and then I'll give a brief introduction to the morning. Well, everyone's being very timely today. Good morning, Philip, Matt, Ainsworth, John, Richard, Sam. Very nice to see you all here. And we're expecting a couple more, but we'll get started. It's a minute past. Right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you are well. Hopefully you can see the lead screen, the topic of our webinar today, which is with Morgan Hunt and Learning Curve Group. And hopefully you can see colleagues from there joining now, and live on screen, Barry Malky, with perfect timing, arrives from Hacked. So the gang's all here this morning in terms of who you're going to hear from. We're recording, as we always do, these webinars so that we can share them widely and share them with across the GUAC membership. And we typically get those recordings out by next week, so that will be available for everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Lindsay Sweeney from Give Us a Chance. I'm going to give the floor to our speakers to go through this session this morning. So, but in time-honoured tradition, I'll give you a really brief, I suppose, top 3 things on GUAC's mind this month. First off, we've had a really positive response to launching an all-party parliamentary group with MPs and peers. So we are set to hold the inaugural meeting of that before summer recess, and then start to have substantive meetings of the all-party group from autumn. That's going to be a good opportunity to have a regular forum at Westminster to talk about housing and employment issues. So that will be the topic of the APPG. And then particularly pleased that Lord Best, a peer, has said he will support that and be a member of the group. He's a quite high profile, real champion of skills and learning and opportunities for people. So that's been good news this month. Later in June, we have the launch of our IPPR research report, which will be towards the end of June. So I'm excited to see that report come out. The draft will be with us next week, and then we'll be sharing it in a fairly discreet roundtable in June, but then we'll use its findings through the rest of the year and at various events, probably also at the joint URSA conference which we're going to do in September, which is the other kind of main event on my mind coming up. So GUAC's got a good amount going on. We've got some nice political engagement happening there. And I've had some good chats in the last few weeks with colleagues at Morgan Hunt and Hacked, and today with Learning Curve Group to get this webinar off the ground. So I'm really pleased. Just so you know, I'll effectively chair it, I suppose. I'll be looking out for any Q&As. Please feel free to comment at any time, and I'll pick those up and share those with our main speakers and make sure we get your questions covered off. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you've got a cup of tea on the go. And I'll go into mute and close off my video so that you can concentrate on the presentation now. So without further ado, over to our trio in London, and Barry broadcasting live from home, I suspect. Over to you, Barry.
No, I'm in someone's office.
You're in someone's office. I hope they know you're there, Barry. Over to you guys now.
Thanks, Lindsay. I thought we'd do introductions first, and then I guess it'd be good for then Barry to just give us his thoughts on how I guess this three-way partnership has started, and then we'll cover off the presentation. So my name is Chris Wimshurst. I'm one of the board directors at Morgan Hunt. I've been with Morgan Hunt for 12 years, and my primary focus in the early days was the further education market, which was how I had my links with John and Learning Curve. But a couple of years ago, I was given the opportunity to look at the housing market, and utilising my knowledge of both education and housing, it became apparent that there were some opportunities for collaboration and for some, I guess, education for the housing world about what different funding pathways are available for the world of housing, and how we might be able to create some relationships that would have a direct and lasting effect on residents within housing associations. So that's, I guess, what framed and how this partnership has come about.
My name's John Cummins, Commercial Director of Learning Curve Group. Learning Curve Group are an approved government training provider, so we work with a large number of employers, with various stakeholders, but most importantly with individuals who want to progress and develop in both their employment and also sort of social ability. So we've been doing quite a lot of work with various housing associations over the last 12 months to enable programs that support social mobility, but also can benefit employees of housing associations through their own development in certain areas. So the most popular one at the moment we've been talking to people is mental health awareness, challenging behaviour. So we'll come on to some of those themes throughout the programme. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today.
And last, by no means least, hopefully, my name's Ed. So at Morgan Hunt, I've been here nearly 8 years, and I'm a divisional director for our government and housing division. So 3 of my teams are the core recruitment teams for operating into housing. So that's housing development, asset management, and housing management.
Thanks, Ed. So Barry, I'll hand over the floor to you, and then we'll crack on with the presentation.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, I was going to be in the office with those guys. They had makeup and everything lined up, but unfortunately, I've got to be in Buckinghamshire for 12:30. So my name's Barry. I'm head of communities at HACT. For people who don't know HACT, we're a think tank that aimed at social housing, and the idea is that we try and find new ways of doing things, new ways of approaching things, new thinking, and stuff like that for the housing sector. My particular focus is on communities and community investment. Prior to this role, I was community investment manager at a housing association in the southeast. Just in terms of this project, I'll give a little run into this project and why it interested me so much. When the sort of social value agenda kind of came up, and went in 2012, and I actually remember at the time I was working as a consultant for a local authority, and there was one of the senior guys went, "Barry, can you look into this social impact stuff? I think it's something we should know about." And that was kind of the attitude that it was. They had no clue and just asked me to do some work on it. And I've always been quite a big fan of it. And, being a kind of community development hippie, I suppose, I like it. And I think what's surprised me is that it hasn't been embraced as wholeheartedly as it should be. Effectively, what you've got is, a lot of organizations like housing associations and local authorities who are having to, due to financial pressures, having to cut services to the community, for example, closing youth services or that kind of thing. And at the same time, a piece of enabling legislation that says, when you're procuring a massive new contract, here's you can ask them to add value to the same things you're cutting, and very few people seem to actually be making that link. And I think it's really interesting that local authorities and housing associations have been quite slow to bring this to the table. So a lot of it seems to have been led by the supply chain. So there's the supply chain will come and say, we'll offer you 2 apprenticeships. £20 million contract, we'll offer you 2 apprenticeships, and that.
Oh, looks like we've lost Barry in mid-flow.
Looks like you've lost Barry, so I would carry on. He might come back in. He may just have a dodgy connection there.
Hang on. Hello, am I back?
Hello, Barry, you're back.
Sorry, I don't know where I got to. I apologise.
We lost you just for about 10 seconds. You may have been buffering without realising.
That was probably the good bit. I was just getting to my punchline. No, what I was effectively saying was that that this doesn't seem to be a real joined up thinking between the procurement teams who are actively reviewing these sort of contracts, big contracts with social value added, and the communities teams who have an innate understanding of what the communities around need. And I had a good example that I think I've bored Chris with 1,000 times is, a procurement director for a housing association actually said to me, I've asked our, I won't name them, everyone on this webinar knows who they are. I've asked this huge solicitors in London what they can do for my community. And I said, well, why are you asking them? They don't know about your community. They're in a big glass building in central London. Why they don't necessarily know what your community is. Why aren't you talking to them and asking them, telling them what your community needs and asking them how they can add value. And so there seems to be a real disconnect. The reason this project really interested me is actually Chris started talking to me about this project when I was still at the Housing Association, and it was obviously something he had, he was very excited by. But what I liked about it was that it went an extra step beyond the normal sort of social value type offer, and it was, how do we benefit the end user of our customers? So in Morgan Hunt terms, that was, how do we benefit the end user of, if Morgan Hunt do a good job, the person who benefits that ultimately is the resident, the social housing resident or tenant or customer or whatever you want to call them. And that way of thinking to me was very, very fresh. And whilst I was working there, we were procuring loads of stuff, and no one had actually come with that kind of ethos of, we want to add value to your end user. And it was that, the customer's customer approach that really, really spoke to me. And I think that's what I thought was brilliant about this project. It really took a step back to understand, what do our customers want? What do they need? How can we add value to that? Where are the different touch points that we can add value to that? Not just to apprentices or whatever the usual sort of social value offer was. This went much, much deeper and looked at much, much more what I would call a partnership focused approach, which was very rare, particularly with between the sort of private sector and the procuring sort of public sector. And that's why I like it. That's why I've been a big fan of this project. And actually, at the time I said to Chris, Chris, you should speak to HACT about this, because this is something that needs to go sort of sector wide. You need to talk to people through the sector about this. I said, and my role at my housing association is not, my network's not, my remit's not quite to on this. And but then I got the job with HACT, so brilliantly I got to work on it anyway. So actually, what HACT have been doing is working with Learning Curve and Morgan Hunt to basically try and promote this to organisations who would use this. And actually, the feedback's been amazing. It's been brilliant. But I think it's taken very personal conversations to really understand the potential of it. So yeah. So I don't know. Do you want me to go into it? I'll leave it to you guys to go into the detail of the project.
Fantastic, Ray. Thank you very much. So we'll crack on with the presentation, and then Q&A afterwards, chaired by Lindsay. So I'll do this presentation. Now, this presentation was the exact presentation that we actually did back in March to the 2 roundtable events that we held actually in this room, in our London office, and also in our Manchester office. So hopefully this gives a flavour about what the partnership's all about, where I guess Morgan Hunt's role finishes and where Learning Curve's role begins, and looking importantly about the outcomes of it, because actually the key part around this is a resident focused programme, and actually trying to make meaningful change in the residents' lives. So going forward, I think it's worth looking, before we start talking about the programme, is to actually look at about why I guess Morgan Hunt invested in this programme. And that comes down to our outlook as a business, and the fact that we do have an ethical approach to business due to the sectors that we work in. So Morgan Hunt predominantly is known as a public and third sector specialist. So our core markets are the NHS, it's social housing, it's charities, not-for-profit, and it's further education colleges. Now, within those sectors, there is a theme of giving, supporting, helping, teaching, and as a result, we feel we have a moral responsibility with the public purse, and therefore that dictates our approach to business. We are very much take a long-term approach to the way that we interact with companies, and we are also acutely aware of some of the perception of how recruitment companies are perceived within society in general, and it's not always good, not always complimentary, and there's I guess a matter of personal pride within this, and it's what we call the barbecue chat here within the director team here at Morgan Hunt, which has happened on numerous occasions to all of us, where you're meeting some new people at a barbecue, you get into a conversation with an individual there who has got a very reputable career, they're a lawyer or a doctor, and you have a really good conversation with them for 10 minutes, and then they turn around to you and ask you what you do, and you mention you're in recruitment, and they consequently walk away in disgust or tuts, and it's a bit a source of frustration. And there's a picture of me looking very sad at a barbecue. Basically, we feel that unfortunately the sector, there are individuals that do add to that unscrupulous reputation, but we're not one of them. And actually that's dictated for us what our vision as a company is, and it's quite a grand one, and basically it's to transform the perception of recruitment. And it's these partnerships where we feel we are working towards that vision of just changing people's mindset about the way, or what a recruitment company can be. Within that then relates to our mission, which is fulfilling career and organisations' aspirations with understanding and integrity. Now, there's two aspects to this which we think are relevant to housing associations and local authorities, and that's the career aspect, so i.e. we're working with the residents to potentially promote career pathways to them. But then there's also the organisation's aspirations as well. How can we work in alignment with an organisation's aspiration to make sure that they achieve their goals? And that's really important to us, because if we're purely just focusing on one part of that, then you're probably not fulfilling what our mission is, which is to hopefully create meaningful employment and to actually create successful businesses. The final part of that then, I guess, is around our values at Morgan Hunt. And these are really important to us, and they essentially dictate our behaviour, and they act as a framework for behaviour. You've got 5 important ones there: in respect, determination, teamwork, understanding, and integrity. And we've thrown the fun aspect in there because we think you've got to enjoy what you do. But what we do is we ask all of our companies that we work with, whether it's housing, NHS, local government, colleges, to hold us to account on these values. So I'm going to give you an example and borrowing Barry's quote around the customer's customer, because this is, I guess, the second time that we've taken this approach to actually working out what our organisations are all about, and trying to, I guess, apply our business strategy to the end user. And within further education, that is around the actual the lecturer. So sorry, it's around the student. So what we do with our further education market is that we've developed a product offering or an approach to working within further education that enables us to focus on the student. Now, we did this in a couple of ways. First of all, we sent a number of our members of key staff out and actually did teaching qualifications. Now, the reason behind that was that we wanted to understand the basics behind teaching, and therefore we can adopt the way that we, I guess, speak to potential future lecturers or current lecturers around their approach in the classroom. Now, if you extrapolate that then through, is that we're able to make then a better judgment call on the staff we're sending into colleges, and that then in turn means that the people we're putting in front of the class are delivering a better service to the students. Now, what that has meant ultimately is that through technology and also through our own understanding, it's had a material impact on colleges' success, and that is judged in Ofsted results. So with some of the colleges we've worked with, after we've implemented our quality programs, they have increased their Ofsted results. So they've gone from a grade 3 to a grade 2 or a 1. And we're absolutely proud of that, and we think that's really good practice of how you operate within the education sector, about focusing on the student and looking at the customer's customer. So we took this approach and then looked at applying it to the social housing sector. And particularly within social housing, they're actually not a dissimilar market in terms of, from a recruitment perspective, in terms of you've got quite a congested number of players within that market who are all vying for position and trying to win business. And within it, actually, there's been a bit of an approach which we consider a race to the bottom, where you have people that are tendering actually below what we would consider a sustainable rate. You've got recent examples of that where businesses have closed or contracts have been essentially taken away. You had one in the railway network just this week around the Virgin East Coast franchise, where essentially, you know, in the rush to win business, margins are put in there that are absolutely unsustainable. And Morgan Hunt did not want to be drawn into that race to the bottom, and therefore we wanted a approach that purely focused on delivering quality and understanding what the organisation was all about. And obviously within housing, that comes down to residents and tenants. And therefore we started to think about, right, how can we really benefit these tenants? And from both an altruistic but also a commercial sense, getting residents employment outcomes or better training is going to make a material impact on their lives, but also it's going to make a material impact on the housing association from a commercial standpoint. Because if a resident is in employment or they're on training, they're likely to be more engaged in what they do, they're likely to pay their rent more freely, there's decreased antisocial behaviour, and therefore there's an actual commercial imperative here for actually focusing on actually supporting residents through to hopefully meaningful employment outcomes. So there's two ways this programme can do that. So that's actually directly for the residents, so qualification of employment outcomes for the residents, but there's also the staff training aspect as well. So if you have better trained staff in things, as John mentioned before, like mental health awareness, particularly if that's frontline staff within housing associations that are dealing with residents every single day, if they're better trained in identifying where there might be some mental health issues, they'll be better equipped to signpost them onto the relevant individuals to actually give them the support necessary. So there's two key aspects to this. One is direct with the residents, and other is better trained staff, again, who in turn deliver a better service to the residents. So what did we do? So John and I had a fortuitous meeting in our offices, and John was able to introduce me and Morgan Hunt to something called the adult education budget. Now, John, do you want to take up what that is?
Yeah, adult education budget is worth about 1.5 billion per year. It's the government pot of money that's directed towards further education, colleges and private training programs like ourselves. It's aimed at being something slightly different to, say, apprenticeship activities. So it's aimed at a number of core areas, but that could include English and maths training, it can include employability, and it can also focus in on some of those added benefits of people in certain sectors accessing technical training in specific topics. So the eligibility criteria is quite simple. The learner has to be, or the individual has to be, over the age of 19. They have to live in England, although we do have access to some pots of money in Scotland, and we're just in negotiations in Wales. And they need to have been resident in the EU for the past 3 years. So certain items like prior attainment and employability status are not necessarily relevant to the ability for that individual and either their employer or the stakeholder that they're linked to being able to access that funding. So one of the frustrations that we have within the further education sector is that money is typically underspent. Last year, the statistic was that £73 million was returned to the Treasury from that particular pot of funding, which, as we are all aware, you know, with certain pressures, Barry touched on it earlier, certain pressures, certain cuts within the UK at this point in time, it seems daft that we're not really utilising and fully utilising the opportunity that adult education budget creates. So our goal, along with other organisations within further education, is to promote the availability of this funds and to promote and create training opportunities that can be funded through that stream of income. Our role really is to assess with the organisations that we work with what the best way of using that money and the best outcomes for both the organisation and the individual. As Chris has mentioned, employability has been one theme that has particularly resonated within the housing association sector. And when we've gone out, we're currently talking to nearly 40 housing associations, or in a relationship with nearly 40 housing associations, we're hearing from them very much that social mobility is the key sort of aspect, whether that be through some of the stuff that HACT are promoting, or some of the stuff that is identified in tenders, is one of those sort of arguable things, but we're definitely getting feedback from the people that sit around the table that they're very keen to allow their residents and tenants to understand the opportunities that this funding and this training can create. And then we work with institutions to put something together that really adds value to that individual. So it's not just about an employability program where you know, they're talked through about job interviews or CV writing. For us, it's very much about embedding a technical skill within that training and taking it beyond just pure employability focus to actually give them something that will enhance their skill set when they go in and talk to local employers. So we do a lot of work around skills analysis in local enterprise partnership areas. We do a lot of work with the housing associations and local authorities themselves to try and identify where they feel the training will be best focused in on. And we've done schemes around employability in logistics, employability in health and social care, employability in retail, employability in construction. So there's always been an outlet for us to make sure that this training is impactful and as beneficial as possible. And we also look at about the fact that not everyone is ready for that type of training. It might be actually there's a better need and focus to be actually on English or on maths to give them the core skills that they need before they go into something that's perhaps more recognised training. So within the adult education budget, we've got quite a lot of flexibility and quite a low eligibility starting point to allow your residents and your tenants to access something that I believe, and certainly Learning Curve Group believe, in the further education sector believe would be incredibly impactful. Now, in addition to that, we're also able to use that money for employees of housing associations and of local authorities. That's a bit more specific. They don't obviously tend to be employability related training schemes, but they're really looking at the portfolio of qualifications that we have available. Typically they're focused on a distance learning model where we go in and see the individuals in a group face to face. We find that has much more powerful outcomes than trying to do that remotely. We enroll people onto the training, and then the courses typically last about 2 to 3 months. They're giving a learning pack and they're able to access that both online and in hard copy. They're allocated a occupationally competent assessor who will support them through that program. So some of the ones that we mentioned, like mental health awareness, it was mental health awareness last week, I think it's dementia awareness this week. We have a range of courses that can be looked at beneficial, whether it be within the housing association or local authority sort of focus areas. But also there can be stuff for people just to access because they have an interest. So for example, I'm often asked by friends or by contacts, it's not particularly enjoyable subject, but end of life care or dementia awareness, because they might have a family member or someone that they're associated with who's going through that and they want to learn more about that topic. So as a focus for a housing association and local authorities, I do think subjects like challenging behaviour, equality and diversity, customer service, team leading, they're going to be the ones that you particularly look at initially. But we have access to around about 35 funded courses that can be delivered in that distance learning model, as well as reviewing that there may be some extra support around English and maths that we could also look at as well. So all of that is funded, as long as those eligibility criteria are kept to. They are funded, and therefore they're no cost to you or the individual that's taking that particular program. But in addition to that, we try and tie that in with any strategies that you have around any utilisation of your levy. A lot of housing associations and local authorities are subject to the apprenticeship levy, which came in about a year ago, and we can advise the best route ways to using that money effectively. Obviously it needs to be done on apprenticeships, but we can support you if you haven't had any conversations to date about ways and means in which you can offer apprenticeships and access that pot. There were 3 statistics that came out in the last couple of weeks that in year one of the levy, 1.28 billion has not been utilised in the first year. 60% of employers have not accessed their digital accounts, and only 18% have actually used any of the money within that system. So there's a threat that that money after the second year will return to the Treasury and not be utilised by organisations that contributed to it. So although, you know, the prevalence of that around and the position of that around, it's never going to be as important as the social mobility and social value agendas that you have. It's also, you know, aligned to your staff training strategies. But it also seems a massive shame that if people aren't using that to the best effect and having the return that, you know, can undoubtedly be created by using the apprenticeship levy money effectively and to the best of our ability to advise and guide you on that. So there's three key areas. The stuff that Morgan Hunt and HACT and ourselves and GUAC have been involved in principally has been that targeting of the individuals with your residents, with your tenants, but there is, you know, much more beyond that.
Thanks, John. So as we've talked about the qualifications for the residents and the courses, and then potentially the staff training that can be involved in as well. But as we know, I guess the third strand to that is then where do we go from there? A qualification in itself is brilliant, but actually, what is that leading to? So what we've been developing with housing associations is actually looking at it from an outcome-led perspective. So, i.e., where are the jobs? Where are the specific skills shortage areas in the employment demographics across the UK at the moment? So we can actually target getting courses and programs set up that lead to meaningful job outcomes. And this is where Ed's team and our recruitment teams come in. And Ed, do you just want to cover off some of the entry-level employment areas where we can support their residents into employment?
Absolutely. So customer service is a really good one to start with. Every housing association will have a customer service function, and in the last 18 months we've hired 2 consultants to focus purely on customer service and operational support into housing associations. Obviously there is a qualification in customer service, so there's clearly a natural link there where a resident can become qualified in that customer service level 2 qualification. And there is an employment outcome or an opportunity there that they could in turn gain employment as a customer service advisor in a local authority or a housing association. And where we feel the role of the organisation can come back into effect is actually with some live work experience, because, you know, as recruiters, I'm sure anybody listening, if you've ever hired somebody or wanted to bring somebody in, spoken to an agency, you do expect the candidate that you're receiving to have some work experience or knowledge in that particular sector. Even at the entry level, if they've got some actual live work experience to work alongside the qualification they've gained, we feel they'll become incredibly employable. And, you know, actually there's a real career route in the housing through that entry level position into customer service. We've recently done some really good work with L&Q, and their profile of desired candidate is actually somebody without any prior experience of housing association work. So they literally just look for somebody with customer service, and it could be telephony work, you know, whatever you can imagine. And in turn, many of those temp placements that we've supplied them with have actually been considered for permanent positions. It then often leads them onto an opportunity to be a housing officer and a full career from there. The other areas that we recruit to on a sort of entry-level basis are trades and labour, which again is a team that has had phenomenal growth here in the last 2 years. We're continually hiring more consultants to help grow that offering as much as possible. We do a lot with the NHS, for example, and you know, again, if we can help residents gain a qualification that leads to an employment outcome, there's a clear link where Morgan Hunt can come back into the equation and help with those opportunities. We also have an incredible offering in the education sector, so this is sort of special education needs, and again there are many of the courses that lend themselves to gaining a tangible qualification that we can then utilise to get that candidate into a position where hopefully they can gain employment. And really we're hoping that as many of these individuals will become, feasible placements for us. We recognise that many residents that go through any process of gaining a qualification may start that process fairly far away from the working environment. They may need a lot of confidence building and boosting to their other skills to actually get them to a position where they can be working. But there is a clear link there where hopefully we can take an individual on that journey where they gain a qualification, they get their confidence built up enough to actually get themselves some real career opportunity.
Thanks, Ed. So I think before we go on to the story so far in terms of, I guess, who we're working with and where we've already demonstrated success, I think I'll give you a case study of an organisation who we were initially speaking to about what is the flexible learning programme that Learning Curve offer. Now, this is a distance learning based programme that can be completed via a workbook or online via their learning portal. Now, for someone to undertake a distance learning programme, there needs to be a level of confidence that they're actually going to complete that programme and they're going to stick to the deadlines. So they have support via a tutor from afar, I guess, by email support, but that is actually self-learning and actually following the set questions through the qualification. Now, we had a housing association push back on us and said, yeah, but there's a certain demographic of our residents that will be able to do that, and that's fine, and they can be, I guess, a little bit more autonomous in their learning. But actually, what about the demographic that is not them, that they're going to require some more support, potentially some face-to-face interaction in more of a traditional classroom-based setting? And the comeback to that was that there is an alternative model that Learning Curve offer, which is their Pathways programme, which is actually classroom-based learning, and it will be actually taking them through that qualification from start to finish. And I think that that's really important, because if you look at where someone or where a resident is on that kind of continuum, where if at the bottom end of the scale you've got disengaged and unemployed, and if you've got the top end of the scale you've got employed, there's going to be different touch points that an organisation, Morgan Hunt, Learning Curve or another, will actually be providing that support to that individual. And therefore the Pathways programme is, I guess, more supportive, more face-to-face. The online or flexible programme is when it's a little bit more distance learning. So I think that the point that I'm trying to make there is that we can tailor the approach to the individual depending on where they are in their journey towards employment. And an example where we've rolled out a programme with Metropolitan recently, which has been around SIA and security, and that's on the Pathways programme. So that's face-to-face, training people up to be future security guards. Once they have completed that programme, they will then be referred to Morgan Hunt, and we will then be able to try to source employment for them as security guards within different public sector organisations that we've got access to. So hopefully that shows that loop through, and that kind of that's completing that circle from training through to employment. So story so far, I guess within any new idea or innovation, you want to make sure that it's sustainable and that it's successful, and therefore we didn't go kind of nuclear with this straight away. We wanted to start small and get an early adopter on board to see how it actually progressed and see how it was taken up from both a staff training and a resident perspective. The first organisation we partnered with were Notting Hill Housing, and shout out to Jessica Page down there as their communities and tenants engagement manager. Notting Hill were brilliant, and they saw the benefits of the programme immediately, and I think they managed to get the promotion to their residents onto their website via Twitter and also via their resident newspaper, all within 3 weeks of our first conversations. They really embraced it. And the result 12 months later is that they've had over 70 individuals, that's residents and staff, complete level 2 qualifications, and now they have a rolling programme that they're actually doing regular inductions literally on a kind of a monthly basis. So that's been a real success. Since then, we were able to launch successful pilots with Barnet Homes, Paradigm, Thames Valley Housing, Wandle and Genesis. So these were the 7 housing associations that we had at time of writing in March. Since the round tables that we had with HACT, we've now got 35 housing associations and 5 local authorities or district councils that we're in discussions with. So as John said, there's a real momentum behind this, and part of this is led by our wants to make a real difference in the lives of these housing associations and the residents, but part of it is also to raise awareness of this funding stream, which is being underutilised, and we want to make sure that in a world where there's mergers, there's funding cuts, budgets for training and learning and development are being cut every day, this money is here, it's ready, it's available for your benefit, and we want to try to, I guess, supercharge that message and get it out to as many people as possible. And I believe that is everything. So we're going to put it out to any questions, which is going to be chaired by Lindsay.
Thank you.
Welcome anything.
Lovely. Just seeing those last slides coming up there now. That's great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, John, and thanks, Ed. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. That was a really useful overview of and pretty thorough, really, in terms of what you're working on and how the program works. Quick, very basic question. Would you be able to share those slides when we share the recording with the delegates of this webinar?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Okay, that was a very quick and easy question that came in. So when we do the recording and get that sent out, we'll include your slides. We had a question, I'll keep an eye on the chat box. We had a question from John, who works at the Foyer Federation, really talking about the partnership and its funding. So the partnership is between Morgan Hunt, Learning Curve Group and HACT, right?
In terms of the promotion of the availability of training and the funding, then we all felt that between the 3 organisations there was an outlet for us to communicate this, to promote this and raise awareness, really, more than anything. In terms of the access to the funding, then ourselves, Learning Curve Group, are the only ones that can physically draw down the money and carry out the training. Yeah. So if anyone ever does engage with this, then it would be through Learning Curve Group, but obviously there's some real close benefits in the Morgan Hunt recruitment side to facilitate access to employment opportunities.
Okay.
As far as the funding and training is concerned, it goes through that stream.
Okay, and that funding obviously is concerned with the costs of training, the adult education budget.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously guidelines. This is public money. We need to be aware of what it can and can't be used for. But fundamentally, the rulings around, there's a set of qualifications that are on a register. As a training provider, we are able to draw down the funding to deliver those qualifications, which means that there's then no charge to either the institution or the individual. When we're talking about adult education money, it's very important. This is actually geared at individuals benefiting from access to qualifications and to training schemes. So we obviously want to make sure that what we're offering is supported by the housing association or the local authority, but the real focus is making sure that we invest in that individual to either develop, whether it be a social side or fundamentally a career development opportunity for them.
Okay, so last sort of, I suppose, question on the partnership and how you're working. John's question was, how is that partnership funding itself then? So I suppose essentially what he means is, if the access is to the adult education budget, Morgan Hunt's involvement and HACT's involvement, is that essentially funded by your core business? So you're making this partnership work through corporate partnership developments. There's no other funding being accessed from other sources to support Morgan Hunt, to support HACT, for example. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great.
Can I it might be worth just clarifying. So HACT's role in this effectively is to kind of help take this to market. HACT have really good relationships with the housing sector, And what came up with a couple of the roundtables, and one of the guys said it, he said, "Oh, we're here because you invited us." And I think Hacked aren't particularly involved in the project in an ongoing sense, in that
Right.
once you make the partnership with Learning Curve and Morgan Hunt, that you won't really have a relationship with Hacked. What we're trying to do is promote this to the housing sector, because my personal thing is I think this is a brilliant project. And to me, and it's something we've said before, this is win-win-win. Everyone seems to benefit from this. And I, along with other housing association people, have pulled this apart and analysed it and, autopsied it. And there is no catch to this. This is genuinely a piece of work that benefits everybody involved. And I think that, and for me, it's sort of I feel it's part of my role is to make everybody aware of this as possible. So that's kind of Hacked's relationship with it, if you see what I mean.
Great, yeah, that's useful, Barry, thanks. And I guess really, Chris, you've explained that Morgan Hunt's CSR or corporate take on working with your public sector partners kind of explains your drivers for it too. So, okay, that's useful. So we know that the funding is essentially adult education budget, and that's what drives this programme. We had a comment and a question from Shirley, who works for Taurus up in the northwest. And this is about, they currently are working across a housing partnership, and they regularly run, I think, sector-based work academies, so sort of vocational routeways into work. And they already link with some training providers and employers and recruitment agencies. And they've had some positive experience there. I think it's a successful route to supporting tenants into work. So it sounds like there's another example up and running. Shirley's question is, could Morgan Hunt add to this? Could you be part of that partnership as well? Over to you guys.
Absolutely. I think we do a bit of work with Taurus up north in terms of recruitment perspective, but certainly not from this, I guess, employment pathways and qualifications. So yeah, absolutely, we're more than happy to facilitate the conversation.
Okay, well, we'll make sure that we share the delegate listing and you can follow that up with Shirley. And just to stress, this is a national programme, right? You can operate anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely that. So we, at Morgan Hunt, we've got offices in Bristol, Manchester, Birmingham and London. So when it comes to the actual, I guess, physical induction of any potential learners, they can be done at the Housing Association or our local offices. And in terms of learning curve, yeah, you're a national.
Yeah, I mean, the only restriction, I mentioned it earlier, was that the adult education budget money is aimed at English residents.
Yeah.
Wales, I had a meeting this week, fun enough, about trying to open up access to funding in Wales, access to apprenticeships, but there's different schemes and it's very regionalised. So we're working on that one and hoping that something will come back positively by August, September. And then Scotland, we do have access to funding through partners. Predominantly, it isn't those pathways or the sector-based academy programs. It tends to be more the distance learning technical certificates. So if everyone is based in England and all your residents and tenants are in England, then there's no issue. We cover that completely. But there's just a couple of issues around the devolved nation.
Fine. Okay.
Do you mind if I add something? It's not really a question. It just might be relevant. Just based on what you were saying, is actually when we took this round to the round table, something that came up was obviously the housing associations have got lots of different models of operation. You've got the kind of stock transfer model, who might have very, very high density, 7,000 properties in one borough. Then you've got the sort of, the national ones who might have 500 units in 100 boroughs, and then you've got your Clarions who and things like that. So one thing that we found was that lots of people wanted to approach this in a different way. So someone a stock transfer might say, actually all our residents are in one local place, this is great for us because we can just there were lots of different options because the amount of different work that Learning Curve Group offer, the amount of different, whether it's the pathways, very early stage pathway stuff, there's a whole range of opportunities. And also from Morgan Hunt, there's a whole range of employment opportunities, entry level up to exec level. So actually, you're not just aiming at those residents who are very in need. It might be people who are underemployed, possibly, and they could go through this program in order to achieve a more stable job, long-term job. So the different models that came out of the discussions were quite interesting. Lots of people wanted to approach it a different way. I know there were 3 housing associations in Manchester that wanted to kind of almost form a sort of learning hub between the 3 of them, because between the 3 of them, they covered the whole of Oldham, for example. But it's quite interesting. I think it's worth noting, and I'm not sure, obviously, on the attendee list, what structure or geography people have, but the whole way this works is very, very adaptable and very flexible to different types, different models of housing association housing. Okay,
thanks. Can I just ask a quick question on that? The national and the local. How, if you've got groups, I suppose it's for John really, this question. If you've got groups where it has been identified that they're going to need a bit more intensive face-to-face type training and support, that distance learning isn't really going to work or isn't going to work at the outset, how do you manage that resource in terms of providing a greater amount of face-to-face support and training?
The simple answer is that we can operate nationally, but there's a few things that will feed into that. But one, and it touched on Barry's point as well, one is that it's really, really important from our perspective to understand what the end user is after, obviously the housing association or the local authority. What are they trying to achieve from this offer? And it's in my mind, there's no real benefit in just say, right, well, we'll do a few people on mental health awareness and that's it. There are some benefits to that, but it's much better for us to understand and get under the skin of each organisation to identify what's going to work best for them. It's also really important for us to understand that the individuals that we're going to see about what is their best learning pathway. Now, there are some people that are much more adaptable to a flexible learning delivery model where they do use something that's far more distance and they don't have somebody that they sit in front of at a set point throughout a week or 2 weeks or whatever it may be. Equally, we know that there is obviously groups that will benefit and have a much more effective learning experience if they have a very structured face-to-face training opportunity. Now, I don't mean this arrogantly, but we deliver 50,000 learning qualifications a year, and that is spread throughout the country. Obviously, there are certain hotspots depending on demographics, but there's not been one pathway program in terms of face-to-face, the sector work-based academy type initiatives that we haven't been able to facilitate. Now, if someone came back and said, look, we've only got one individual, that might be a different but the reality is that's highly unusual. So we, and also it doesn't mean that, if you bring us today and say, right, great, we want to go into this, that we're going to be there Monday morning. It's about planning and understanding what the outcomes are for both the individual and for the organisation we're linked to, and then making it as effective as possible. And as I say, the beauty of it, Barry said it, I said it earlier, it's a real frustration that there's all this money in the sector in further education that's underutilised. The whole point of the round tables, of the associations with HAC scenarios like today, is about making people aware of this, because and that's a failing on the further education sector, in my opinion. So we need to make sure that as many people know about this stream of funding, and that then we spend time and energy in investing in creating something that has the best outcomes for all of those people involved. So there is the ability to go national. There is the ability to set something up. The whole pop-up pathway type scenario is absolutely where we see it. We're taking this to you. So we want to come to your organisation, to your locality, and devise something. And for those national partners, it might be something, if they offer in Devon, they want slightly something different in Kent or Newcastle, Manchester. That is all achievable within the model that we operate.
Cool. Okay. Sounds like you can handle that then, John.
So it's a very long-winded response to say yes, we can do it. I
think the housing sector generally is one of collaboration, and it's actually the roundtable events are incredibly refreshing. That different organisations bouncing ideas off one another to say, oh, actually, we may struggle to get to the sort of critical mass of 10 to 12 learners in this geographic area, in this part of London, for example. And, you know, a housing association nearby could be able to add further learners to make sure it does reach that number. So yes, there might be a case where we can only identify a handful of learners, but if there's a housing association nearby that has a, you know, similar cohort and it's an interest in that general course, then, you know, it's completely doable.
Okay. Probably the last question from me. This has begun and got some good pace to it through this year. Who or how, or if, is there going to be any kind of national evaluation and number tracking of how many people go through this and tracing, as far as is reasonable, the outcomes from engagement to learning to completion of learning to job? Do you envisage having a kind of national picture of that at any stage?
Short answer is yes.
Yeah.
So from John's side, they can track,
yeah,
obviously the learners and their outcomes, but that's what we've been talking about recently. It's how then the Morgan Hunt link comes in, and then how we then actually track that employment outcome. And we've got systems and technology to be able to do that on our own CRM. So that's quite actually relatively easy to do.
I mean, there's your interest, but as far as the government's concerned with this utilisation of public monies, then we as a training provider have to feed back the outcomes, whether that be the success of the qualification in terms of achievement, but also the destination. So has this course made a difference to somebody in terms of, have they gone to further study at a higher level? Have they gone into they've gone from temporary work into full-time employment? Have they found a job, you know, they're previously unemployed? So we're tasked with capturing. We also do provide individual reports to each of the organisations we work with that are highlight who's actually been engaged on the programme, where they are on the programme, and their outcome in terms of their achievement or potential withdrawal. Now we have an overall success rate of just under 94% of individuals that once they become involved in their qualification, they then go on to achieve their qualification, which is, you know, very high compared to the national averages. So we know that the model works right, but we're always being evaluated by stakeholders such as Ofsted or the Skills Funding Agency about, is that you know, that grading continuing? Is that percentage still at that rate? So it would make sense to feed that into something that maybe, you know, we can do with HACT or with GUAC about, you know, an evaluation up to 6 time. We offer a dedicated account director for each organisation, so that if they've got any problems or issues with the course, or they want any feedback about any of the course and the engagement of their individuals, then they've got someone that they can go to and ask that question. So to try and close the loop on any sort of potential risk of not communicating effectively.
Do you mind if I just come in on there, just on evaluation stuff? I think there's quite a lot of potential here, as well as the sort of the things around the numbers of people who've got qualifications and got into work. And this is something I know, Lindsay, you and I spoke about recently. There's also the fact that there's the well-being aspect of that. You know, all of the people who are going through this process will see things like uplifts in confidence or things like that you could use, like social value bank type measurements to get that, to show that what we'd call the soft outcomes, as well as just getting a job. There's also this thing about you know, every time someone goes through this course and then someone gets into work, actually you've just saved the government a chunk of money. And also, you've probably saved the NHS a chunk of money as well. Do you know what I mean? There's all these sort of additional pieces of evaluation that coming from exactly the same piece of work. But then when you put that together, you've got quite a compelling case to whoever wants to listen to it. So the local authority, you might not be working with them, they might be really interested to know that your program, working with 4 different housing associations in their local authority, got 50 people off job seekers or whatever, you know what I mean? And there's huge impacts from this program that could be could be measured and evaluated if we did a sort of belt and braces type approach.
Okay. That might be something we come back to in terms of taking the project through this year and next. So, yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad we've got some GUAC members engaged with it and hacked. We're at time. It's midday. So thanks very much again for coming on. I'm glad the tech worked and the presentation was really useful. I'll end the webinar now. Thanks all the attendees for coming along. We will get everything out to you by next week, including the slides. Have a very nice long weekend, everyone, and thanks to our panelists again. Okay?
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.